Thanks, Marcy. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for taking the time to participate in today's event. I've got a relatively brief presentation. I don't think it'll be anywhere close to that half an hour mark that Marcy mentioned, to walk through an update on the service, after which myself and my colleagues will be available to answer any questions. As Director Lee mentioned, it's a beautiful sunny day outside, so we don't want to take up any more of your time than necessary. So we'll be available for as long as there's questions flowing. Yeah, so essentially today we're just taking the opportunity to provide an update on the service, some of the initiatives that we have underway and have planned, and then also just be open to any questions or concerns from the public that we can talk about in this forum. So maybe I'll ask you to move to the next slide, Marcy. Yeah, so just starting with an overview of the service for some of you that might be new to the service or haven't participated in one of these events before. So the Black Creek-Oyster Bay service straddles the Strathcona Regional District and the Comox Valley Regional District. And that's because it's been in place since before these two regional districts split. And so maybe just back a couple slides there. There we go. Yeah, so several services were left intact after the split, and this was one of them. So it's been around for well over 40 years. It now includes 3 groundwater wells and a river infiltration gallery as the drinking water source. So I say now includes, so I'll touch on that on a later slide, but we have just, we're in the process of commissioning that 3rd groundwater well that we've been talking about for quite some time. It's been a long journey to get there. So we now have those 3 groundwater wells and then the river infiltration gallery. And so traditionally we use that river infiltration gallery on the Oyster River to meet our summertime demands. It's got a very large capacity, or at least it did historically. Over the last 5 or 6 years, our confidence in it was a little shaken in 2015 during that drought year. So since then, that's what put the pressure on us to develop an additional groundwater well to provide a little bit more confidence that we can meet the water demands of the service during drought years. So the service supplies water to approximately 950 properties north and south of the Oyster River. And that's about 1/3 north of the Oyster River and 2/3 to the south. And that represents about just under 2,400 people in both electoral area C and D. So the system, in addition to the supply infrastructure, there's a treatment building on the Oyster River Nature Park. And all 3 of those, or 4 of those sources that I mentioned are also located within the Oyster River Nature Park, which is on the north side of the river, so in area D. So the treatment, after treatment, the water is boosted, pushed to 2 reservoirs, one in the north on Macaulay Road and one in the south near Kelland, and then distributed through 49 kilometers of transmission and distribution piping. Yeah, next slide, please. So some of the initiatives I'll touch on today include water meter replacement. So we're modernizing our fleet of water meters. So I'll touch on that, give you an update on the new production well, which I'm happy to announce is now in service, and then go over some of the proposed amendments to the development cost charge and capital improvement cost charge bylaws. And I'll explain what those are for most of you probably aren't familiar with those terms. So next slide. Yeah, so first of all, water meter replacement. So we've completed approximately 180 out of the 950 to date. And this is a 5-year, approximately a 4 or 5 year program. So which has attracted some grant funding from both Area D and Area C to help make the cost more affordable to the service. The drivers are certainly operator safety. So specifically those on the highway, of which there's quite a number. If you think back to that, the map of the service area, the service is quite long, north to south, with the majority or many of the properties off of the Island Highway. So it is a safety concern. So there's a requirement for 2 operators, and they're constantly starting and stopping and exposed to traffic for the the couple days that takes them. But in addition to that very critical kind of safety piece, reliability. The existing meters are reducing in reliability. They're failing more frequently. And there's a cost saving aspect as well in terms of the amount of time it takes to read the meters. So the existing meters require the operators actually get out, locate the meter, and tap it. Just with at the time they were a high-tech device, not requiring the operator to bend down and read the numbers off. They just required a tap. But the new ones are a drive-by, so they're cellular, and they can be read in a tiny fraction of the time that the current meter reads take. So that's significant savings to the service. And then finally, leak detection, because these, in fact, they're cellular, so they can be read pretty much any time by our operators. And there will also be functionality which we will roll out over time to have property owners able to use a smartphone app and check their consumption, and even set alerts, which we will have on our end, across the board. But landowners, property owners will also, over time, be able to have that functionality, so that a leak is picked up almost instantly. Instantly, like from one day to the next, rather than on a billing cycle, which has been the situation to date. So major advancement in that regard. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the second piece, wanted to update you on the new production well project. So this project has been in the works for a number of years. It was, as I mentioned, driven by the kind of the scare that we had in 2015 during that drought year. We had implemented stage 3, just given the severity of the drought, stage 3 water restrictions. And even then, there were several days where we were struggling to meet demand, and seeing some pressure drops in the system, which is not where we want to be as a water service. So we were driven to initiate this project, and it took us longer than expected to work through the jurisdictional kind of aspects to the project. But we've got there. We've now early this year finalized a formal access agreement with the SRD, who own the park. So we're in a really good place there, and that freed us up to initiate the project and complete it before the grant deadline at the end of March 2021, so just 2 months ago. So we were able to, so the project attracted 83% grant funding. It came in significantly under budget, which is really impressive, and no small thanks to Zoe Berkey, who was on the line, who led that project on our end. So that's excellent news. So the system is now up in service, and we're in the process of proving out the capacity of the well. So that'll be completed over the coming weeks, but the true test will come this summer when the groundwater levels are at their seasonal low. So we definitely look forward to hopefully some good news then at that point. And these photos just show the new kiosk, which is on top of the well that was installed in the park. So you're looking inside the kiosk on the left. The large pipe coming out of the ground on the right is the well. It's a 20-inch casing, and then some of the controls and valving are above ground for ease of access and safety. And then on the right, you can see the beautiful wrap that was put on that kiosk that Zoe selected and worked with. It's amazing. On the right day, it really does blend completely into the forest. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so the third piece that I wanted to update the community on was relating to development cost charges and a change that's proposed to the bylaws for DCC, so development cost charge, as well as the related capital improvement cost charge. So DCCs are monies that are collected from property owners or developers when either new lots are created or new units. So there are DCCs in place for a residential unit, multifamily units, commercial units, industrial, commercial hospitality, and we have recently kind of spotted a gap in the development cost charge bylaw, in that there was not a category and a corresponding rate for campsites. As many of us know, that this local community is a very popular place, especially in the summertime, and there are campsites being added to the system, and while they have a different impact on the water system, they still have an impact, particularly given that they are occupied during the peak water demand time of year. So fundamentally, the purpose of a development cost charge is to offset some of the infrastructure expenditures that are required to meet the needs of new or additional capacity requirements without adversely impacting existing users. So, for example, when a new well is added, or a pipe is replaced, but replaced with a larger one, or a reservoir is replaced, but with a larger one, or a new reservoir is added. All of those would be situations where the cost that's attributed to meeting the demands of additional development is allocated to that development through the development cost charge. And it's a formal process that is mandated by the provincial government, and it restricts DCCs that are collected. The rate is calculated based on a specific project list, and we're only able to use that revenue on those projects, those growth-related projects that we've identified. Next slide, please. So the DCC bylaw is for development or addition of units within the service area. The capital improvement cost charge bylaw, which is CICC, it's the same rate, but for properties that are being added from outside of the service area. That's the only difference. Otherwise, they're identical. So as I mentioned, we had spotted a gap in the bylaw, in that there was not a rate provided for campsites. So the proposed changes to the bylaw that is in front of the Black Creek-Oyster Bay Services Committee would add campsites as the new type of development, and would provide a rate of $1,414 per campsite, which is payable at the time of the building permit. So just to put that into context, it's about 25% of the single family home rate, which is the same as the multifamily. So in other words, that rate is just over $6,000 for every new residential unit that's added. Whereas the campsite, we undertook significant research and analysis to come up with that number, and we feel is proportional to the actual impact on the summertime water demand. So we feel that, so once implemented, that will fill that gap and ensure that that developments that include that type of development are not slipping through the gaps and are paying their fair share towards the service. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in terms of what's next for 2021, one of the projects that we're quite excited about is construction of the water main extension along Schultz Road. So this is to tie into a project that's also been on the books for quite some time, which is addressing the fire flow situation at the Miracle Beach Elementary School along Polson Road. So initially that project had been envisioned as an upsizing of the water main heading to the school to ensure fire flows. but we definitely always had in mind, if the development were to occur on the other side of the school, on the north side, that there could be an opportunity for a better project, which instead of upsizing the pipe to the elementary school, would include connecting the existing pipe at the elementary through to Schultz Road and up to the highway, thereby providing a loop. So the fire flows, once this project is complete, the fire flows at the elementary school will be ample because flow can come from both directions. And then we also don't have the downsides of a dead end on the water system, which in some low consumption times of year can cause some problems with water quality. So yeah, that's an exciting project that should be built this summer. The second one that I wanted to highlight was we'll be initiating a water master planning process for the service, and this is a fairly well-defined process that water systems undergo on a periodic basis, maybe every 10 to 15 years, and there's a number of objectives, but put very simply, in our case. We recently completed an asset management plan for the service, so that's really that gave us a really good handle on the infrastructure we have. What do we have? Where is it? How much? When was it built? Where is it at in its lifespan? And to a lesser extent, including some condition assessments to also factor into risk assessments. But what that didn't tell us is what needs to be, it tells us what needs to be replaced based on condition and age, but it doesn't tell us when we need to replace things based on growth and increased demand. And so the water master plan will fill that gap. So it's a 6 to 8 month process that hopefully should be completed by the end of the year or early next. That will really complement the asset management work and tell us where, so it'll look at for example, the source, take another look at that. It'll look at our key transmission lines, our key distribution lines, and telling us, based on the development that is currently in the works, based on an assessment of what's possible under the local area plan, these are the areas that need attention and focus for upsizing to ensure that we have continued good service delivery and good quality water. So that and one of the outcomes from that process, will be an update of the development cost charge project list. And so you expect to see an update to those rates next year once we have a renewed and refreshed kind of sense of where we need to go as a service. And then the last piece that I wanted to highlight is the continued investigation for additional water sources. So, that, as I mentioned, the third well project, the well that's currently or just being brought online now, it did take longer than expected to implement. So time has passed, growth has occurred. We've got a better handle on the localized impacts of climate change. And I mean, to put it simply, we're still not feeling super comfortable about our ability to to continue to meet peak summertime demands in the face of kind of uncertain climate conditions. So we are and we have been for some time now looking at additional sources of water. So nothing specific to speak to now, just that that's something that we're working hard on, and we expect to be bringing some proposed options through the Black Creek-Oyster Bay Services Committee, sometime this year for projects that could be implemented for subsequent summers. Next slide, please. So that was the bulk of the presentation. I just a couple last pieces. First of all, just a kind of a reminder to residents that just in case you didn't know, we do have a farm status rebate program. So for properties that do have farm status and that can demonstrate that you are eligible for an annual rebate. And what that means is if your if you have farm status, you're likely using some water for agricultural purposes, and likely going into the tier 2 or the tier 3 in terms of the consumption. And what the rebate provides is a rebate down to an effective rate at tier 1. So if if a non-farm status property is up into the tier 2 and 3, if you achieve the rebate, you would get a rebate that would effectively bring down your volumetric rate down to that tier 1 level. So we provided the email address on the screen there that you could reach out and contact us for more details. But it's something that a number of properties have taken advantage of. And last slide, please. And yeah, just lastly, just want to point out that we're just a few days into May, and that as with every year, we have an automatic shift into stage 1 water restrictions on May 1st. And maybe I'll just leave that slide up on the screen as I say thank you, and really appreciate you taking the time today to listen to our update, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. That was a good tour of what's happening with the service. We've got a few questions in the chat. I'll just start at the top if you're ready to go. Specifically, question about were all of the improvements described in the 2009 Coors and CVRD staff report completed and on budget?
Oh, the improvements.
Let's see, Chris. You're just giving it.
I'm looking at the question. Thanks, Marcy. I'm to be honest, right off the top of my head, I'm not exactly sure which staff report you're talking about. But maybe this is an example of a question that we could just. I know that we've made a commitment to answering all the questions we can today and following up later, so I can definitely follow up on this question.
That sounds good. We'll add that to the list to expand on after this evening. The second question, this might involve some math. It's in the chat, Chris, but I'll read it word for word. So if the DCCs were set to fund the improvements expected between 2009 and 2020, what costs are the DCCs and CICCs calculated to cover, and can we obtain those calculations?
Okay, well, these are some tough questions right off the bat. So, I mean, I guess as I explained in the presentation, the DCC and CICC rates are based on recovering the eligible share of the eligible projects, so the projects that are on the DCC list. So it's not an exact science. So in terms of what we set out to recover from development versus what we actually did, that will be part of the process that we'll go through early to mid next year as we refresh the DCC bylaw. There is a bit of a looking back aspect to that, but I can confidently say that we have not allocated any of the DCC or CICC revenue that's been collected to non-eligible projects, and that we are constantly striving to abide by the bylaw and ensure that we get as close to those amounts as possible to ensure that that the desired effect is had on the rest of the customers, which is the objective being that that existing users are not funding the cost of growth to the service.
Okay, great. Question about if there's a possibility to obtain a copy of the DCC project list. And then also a question, I'll just add it on. Can we find out how many commercial ratepayers are on the Black Creek-Oyster Bay service currently?
Sure. So into the first question, yeah, I assume that it was public at the time, but we can definitely dig back, and if not, we can share that, or regardless, we'll share a link in the follow-up answers to these questions. And then in terms of the number of commercial connections, Yep. So certainly, we'll respond to this question. I don't have that number off the top of my head, but it's easy for us to determine.
Okay, we can add that to the list. And then a question about wells. Are the wells close to each other, and do they draw from the same aquifer? Sorry, are the 3 wells close to each other, and do they draw from the same aquifer?
Sure. Yeah, they are relatively close to each other, like within 150 meters, maybe even a little bit tighter than that. And so they all draw from the same unconfined aquifer. So part of the the 2 pre-existing wells have been around for some time, and before my time. But I know that in detail the process that we went through when identifying the optimum location for the new well included pump testing, installing level transducers on the existing wells, as well as a neighbor's well, and then running a pump test for a specific flow rate and a specific time, and then looking at the data for those neighboring wells to see how much drawdown was experienced by those other wells when we're really drawing down a test well location. So first step was drill the test well at a location that was deemed desirable, and then undertake the pump test and see how much influence was experienced on those other wells. So, there was something on the order of 5 or 10 centimeters, which given that these wells, typically have 3 or 4 meters of drawdown, that was seen as satisfactory, actually really good. So I guess the bottom line, even though they're drawing from the same aquifer, it's a very large unconfined aquifer, and at that distance from each other, they all provide, effectively a fresh water source that it negligibly impacts each other. Yeah.
Okay. And we've got one more question posted in the chat, and then I'm thinking, because we have the directors here, as it would be at a true open house, after Chris, this next question, if the directors wanted to share anything just briefly. So I'll go to the question. We've got a question about, did the DCCs that were collected between 2009 and 2020 fully cover the projects that were on the DCC project list?
That question is pretty similar to the first one I answered. So I think my answer was that I think we've tried. It's not an exact science, given uncertainties over timing and when the projects are completed, what development occurs. But we did our best to set the rate at that time. We applied it consistently across all eligible projects, and worked to maximize the revenue, following the bylaw, to ensure that the incremental development was not negatively impacting the existing users, and that it was being covered by additional development. So I think to the extent as possible, yes.
Okay, that's great. I didn't want to put you on the spot, Director Lee or Director Grieve, but if you wanted to chime in and unmute yourself, I think we've got quite a bit of time left. And as you know, if this were an open house, we'd be having coffee and cookies by this point. So I welcome you if you'd like to address the group or say hi in any way.
Well, this is a virtual meeting, and I want my virtual cookies now. And my cup of coffee, please.
They're just here in the lobby.
Thank you. When it comes to growth, I think it's important to mention that with the regional growth strategy in the Comox Valley, that 90% of growth is supposed to occur in the municipalities, because that's where smart growth occurs, because that's where the infrastructure already is. Now, I know there's some people that are concerned about growth outside the urban areas, but I understand that we're holding to our 10% pretty closely. There is some development up in that area, but it's not run amok, so to speak. I think it's well within the confines of what had been planned back with the regional growth strategy in 2011. So I think there is some concern that Chris has brought forward about times of extreme drought. Now we know that there is, whatever you want to call it, there is a changing climate out there, and we are seeing drier summers, especially some years. We kind of dodged the bullet last year. I think we had a pretty normal summer, but this summer may, who knows? You know, it's definitely a it's definitely an unknown. I think Chris alluded to that as well, that, you know, it's not a perfect science. So while we do have the 3 wells, we also have an infiltration gallery that exists in the river itself. And I'm just going to ask Chris if he can tell me, are we still using that in times of where we need the extra capacity? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Director Grieve. So yes, the answer is we're definitely still using it. It's not, in the past, during the summertime, it was our only source. We only used the groundwater wells in the winter when the river was too murky to draw from. But starting in 2014, 2015, when we had that drought, we found that we couldn't keep up with the water demand just pulling from the infiltration gallery. So we started to experiment with operational methodologies that saw us drawing from all sources at once to meet demand. So we haven't had a repeat of quite that, you know, that bad of a drought since. And yet we've continued to kind of mix our sources. But yes, the infiltration gallery is still an important piece of our summertime, of meeting our summertime water demand.
Thank you for that.
Director Lee, are you maybe unmute yourself, Director Lee, if you wanted to make sure, Director Lee, I can't tell if you're chiming in, but do unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question. I'm not hearing any audio, Director Lee, but I think if you just unmute yourself. Okay, maybe while Director Lee's getting there, are there any other questions we've had?
Okay, I'm unmuted now, right?
Oh, yes, you're with us. Great.
Okay, thanks very much. Sorry, I don't know why, but it's got 2 different spots that indicate unmute, and I couldn't seem to get them either to work. But my concerns have always been environmental impacts on the river, and I am very cognizant of any overdrawing of river resources that might impact the salmon and the ecology of the Oyster River. So I don't know, Chris, if you could elucidate on that, because there was to be an environmental impact study on the 3rd well that we did, and to make sure that we weren't drawing it down too fast and hard. Did we finish that study? You know the one?
Yeah, thanks. Yep, no, definitely. Thanks for the question, Director Lee. Yeah, so that work is ongoing. We're working with the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations to undertake that environmental flow needs assessment. So we're building on the extensive work that we've done to date in proving out the case for the 3rd well. So that work is ongoing. But we're working under the guidance of FLNRO. So exactly what form that takes is yet to be determined, but that is underway. Yeah. So the conclusion is that you know, that those groundwater wells are likely within the zone of influence of the river. So while they are close to the mouth of the river, because the groundwater flows, you know, relatively diagonally to the direction of flow of the river, water extracted from the ground there does have some effect on the amount of water in that very bottom part of the river. But early indication is that in terms of proportion, it's well under the threshold that would require or cause concern. But yeah, stay tuned on that one.
Okay, that's what I'm watching out for, because it really concerns me. I was also concerned during the discussions on the DCC and capital cost charge bylaws about defining the difference between water usage on mobile home parks versus campsites. Because what I see happening on campsites, especially say in my area, Salmon Point Resort, have big fifth wheels pulling in from Alberta and Ontario that are, you know, situated there. The park is absolutely packed full of these big units, and I don't see the difference between them and a mobile home park. Yet the mobile home park pays $6,144 development cost charge, and the RV park pays only $1,400. And so we have been, our staff and Director Grieve, we have been investigating and seeking legal definitions of the difference between campsites and mobile home parks, and that kind, and whether that cost being applied is fair and reasonable to all the users. So that's why that's partly why we're having this meeting today, is that I'd like to have some public input on that issue too.
That's great. I think as we are digesting that, I'm not sure there was a direct question in there, but thank you, Director Lee, for bringing that up. Chris, did you want to speak to that? We've got 2 more questions in the chat that I could jump to while you consider. A question about leakage. Are the underground distribution pipes in good shape, and how much leakage occurs?
The underground distribution pipes in good shape. Well, there's definitely a mix, but we do have, you know, of that 49 kilometers, there's quite a significant fraction that is kind of older asbestos cement pipe. So, you know, not at the end of their lifespan, but definitely in the last quarter or third. So the recent asset management work that we've done has highlighted a significant spike in kind of replacement projects that will be required in about 15 to 20 years. And so that represents that last kind of quarter or third of the lifespan. So we do have leaks, as you know, as does any water distribution system, because there are localized impacts like groundwater levels, you know, acidity of the soil, pressure, flow. Those factors can increase the wear and the risk rating of a pipe and lead to higher incidence of leaks. So we do have leaks. However, the fact that you know, that all of our connections are metered does help us to balance and identify and be able to pinpoint where leaks occur. Although many of them just, you know, result in surface water that comes to the attention of our residents and very quickly to us. So in terms of quantifying how much leaks, you know, since meters have gone in, that will have dropped significantly. And I'd say, you know, the vast majority of leaks present themselves very quickly and are repaired. And I would say there's likely not much out there in terms of under the radar leakage.
Good to know. Good to know. I think a question about sort of the budgeting side. Are services like the BCOB water service permitted to incur a funding shortfall or debt? And I imagine that's, you know, within the fiscal year or long term even. I'll let you respond to that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So the easy one first. You know, yes, the services like this are definitely allowed to incur debt. Short-term debt has a fairly low bar in terms of entering into it. So less than 5 years can be done, you know, without any assent. But for longer terms, then electoral assent can be required. So that's something that this service has done in the past. and is likely to do again in the future. Particularly I mentioned that big spike in pipe replacements. So one of our goals in implementing the asset management plan was to anticipate that and adjust rates and saving accordingly, so that we're putting money away into reserves, so that when it comes time to undertake these projects, we can fund at least some of it through reserves and strike that balance between reserves and debt, which is a conversation that will be coming to the service soon. In terms of funding shortfalls, there's fairly strict, and I have to admit I'm an engineer, not a finance person, but I know that there are strict rules regarding regional services running deficits. So while there may be some way to run a deficit year over year briefly, generally these services are I think by making use of a previous year's surplus, but generally, yeah, deficits are not allowed, and there is no flow of money between services at all. So BCOB Water Service, it does not share reserves or share any type of funding with other services. It's fully fully supported by user fees from the service, and none of the user fees collected or otherwise collected from the service participants makes its way into any other services.
Okay. And Director Grieve has added something in the chat there, expanding on that a little bit. I think I see a few people heading off to dinner, but we still have some time left. However, I will bring up the screen in case you are interested in having some question answered by email. I'm just going to bring the slide up where, as I mentioned, we have recorded this and it's going to be posted, actually not on the Comox Valley Regional District website. There's no real spot there, but on the Comox Valley Regional District YouTube channel. So you could find this video there. And this is the best email to send any questions if you think of something later this evening that you didn't have a chance to ask. This would be the email to use. I know we've heard from a few of you in the chat with questions, but this would be a chance. If there's any other questions from any of those in the open house that haven't been answered or you've always wanted to know, we've got about 10 minutes left. And yeah, I think, oh, there's some nice thank yous coming in. I think rather than keep us all on the line close to dinner time, if we're not hearing any other questions, I take that's a good sign. I take it that Chris, your update was covered all the bases. Yeah, is there anything Chris or the CVRD team or directors would like to add before we wrap? It's yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Say a quick thank you. Yeah, quick thank you for participating, and hopefully I was able to answer your questions, and glad Marcy put the email up there. So yeah, email with any further questions and we'll get back to you right away. Thanks again.
I'd like to chime in on that too. I'd like to chime in on that and thank everybody for taking the time out of their busy day to participate in this, because it's almost an anomaly now that we actually get a chance to talk to our constituents. So thank you very much for participating in this Zoom.
Yes, and I'd like to chime in on that too, and thank everybody for coming. And also, I forgot to mention, Wednesday I got a $30,000 grant from my gas tax to put towards the new meters. So there's 30,000 more in the pot for the new meters. So Director Grieve's putting in his share, more than his share, and more than me anyway. But 30,000 will go a long way to replacing those meters, and it's all federal gas tax fund. So we don't have to take it out of taxes.
That's great news, and a great note to close on. So it's a sunny evening out there. I'd like to say thank you for your time and your interest in taking part in this open house, to CVRD staff, to the directors who are with us. I think I'm going to wrap it up there, but enjoy your evening, everyone, and we look forward to the next time we can do this again. Thank you.
Thanks, Darcy.
Thank you, Marcy.
Marcy, thank you. Bye.